Good morning, everybody, and welcome along to this edition of LiR Confidential on lirmedia.tv. We have a usual email, info@lirmedia.tv, for all your comments. And indeed, and press the red button on the right-hand side to subscribe to our channel. It's free. Very few today is free, but that's one thing you can do for free. I'm delighted to have, remotely speaking, in studio this morning, Senator Paul Gavan. Welcome, Paul.
Good morning, and thanks very much for the opportunity to have a chat.
Yeah, indeed. Now, Senator Paul Gavan was elected in 2016 on the Labour panel for Sinn Féin to Shannon Aaron. He's been a busy man, I can tell you that much, reading down all the stuff. I don't know how you fit all your activities into the 5 or 6 days or 7 days probably at this stage, you know. But where did you grow up, Paul?
I grew up in Stamford Hill and Tottenham in North London. Like so many Irish people, I was born outside of Ireland, and I was born in London in the 1960s. Both of my parents had to leave Ireland in the 1950s, along with a couple of million others, because of the disastrous state of the economy. But I did come home. Came home to Westmeath. That's where my father's home place was. In 1979 as a 13-year-old, and landed in Limerick then in 1983 at NIHE, as it was called at the time, to do a degree in European Studies.
Yeah, I remember it well, NIHE, and of course before that was at Thomond College. Remember that? Well, you're too young to remember that.
Well, I remember the NIHE part for sure.
And how did you find the college in Limerick?
I love this. I absolutely love this. To be honest with you, I fell in love with Limerick at that stage. I met great friends who are still my best friends today, 35 years on or whatever it is. Really love Limerick, even though at the time that the city was going through a hard time in the 1980s. But it was a great place to go to college. We all lived on a kind of a close-knit area there in Castletroy. And, you know, in fairness to Ed Walsh, she did a superb job. I mean, that university as it stands now is absolutely crucial to the economic well-being of the city. But it was also a great place to get an education. I was very fortunate to be able to get there, to go there and complete my education.
And Paul, were you always interested in politics growing up? Had you a sort of a good love affair with it, you know?
You couldn't help but be interested in politics growing up in London, first of all, again in a tight-knit Irish working class community in North London. The Troubles were on at the time, and you know, that was something you became aware of even as a young child. You'd see it on the news. I remember my mother looking at the telly one day and seeing my elder brother being chased on horseback by a policeman. Just after the Bloody Sunday killings, there was a huge protest in Trafalgar Square. So, yes. You know, the fact of the matter was, you couldn't help but be political when you could see what was going on back at home.
Absolutely. And I was in the army in the 1970s myself, the Irish Army. So we had first, a close-up look at it on border duty and all of that. So then when did you decide when did Sinn Féin become an actual sort of an attractive party to join?
Well, I'd always voted Sinn Féin, always. It just seemed the natural fit for me, being A, Republican, and B, a socialist. You know, I come from a working class background. Always proud of that. My mum and dad both worked in factories all their lives to make a living for all of us. But I didn't join the party, I think, until around the year 2000 or so. And to be frank with you, that was because I was just a young man trying to find my feet in life. And I ended up going back to London in the late 80s for a number of years, and only came back to Limerick in late 93. So by the time I'd got myself some kind of career established, it was heading on for around the year 2000. And what I noticed was, whenever I saw workers in struggle in Limerick, whenever I saw picket lines, I'd always see people from Sinn Féin on the picket lines with them, showing solidarity to them. So that swung it for me. I met a couple of local members and joined the party, I would say, around the year 2000.
And of course, the party has the party has thrived in recent times, as you know. I mean, a lot of that, of course, I noticed myself. I live in Shannon, just out the road here, and there's always activity. It's always a Sinn Féin member that's easily accessible and easily contactable. I'm not saying that there isn't anybody from any other party there, but they seem to be very, very active, if you like, in their communities, which helps as well, you know. But the party itself, you know, was led for a long time by Jerry Adams. We had him on here. Another member of our team had him on here recently. He's retired now, of course. But that was a tough position for any leader coming in after Jerry Adams to take over, whether they were woman or man, you know. And you think Mary Lou McDonald has acquitted herself well now in leading the party?
Oh, I think there's no doubt. I mean, I every day somebody says to me, that woman's doing an amazing job. And the one thing that I've noticed over recent years is, as we've broadened our support, as people have hopefully begun to come over to the Sinn Féin side of the arguments in terms of politics, I think they're listening more to what Mary Lou has to say, and they're impressed with what she has to say. And listen, I mean, I don't know Mary Lou very well. It's been a privilege to work with her in public life for the last 6 years. But I can tell you this much: she's 100% genuine. She's 100% genuine about trying to bring change to this country, obviously about trying to unite our country, but to build a new republic, where families like mine wouldn't have to emigrate again, where we'll have a decent future for our young children, where they'll be able to get housed, be able to get a decent health service, a real republic. And that's always been my motivation. Like, you know, I love the idea of what a republic should be and what it could be. We're not there yet, but I'm optimistic.
And of course, you'll be a Republican with a big R, cynically speaking.
Well, to me, it always makes it just always made sense. You know, if you think about what a republic should be, you know, where we have a separation of church and state, where everyone is treated as equals, where everyone gets a fair chance and opportunity at life, where there's a real emphasis on equality. That's the kind of island I want to grow up in. And of course, I want to see our country united. And thanks to the Good Friday Agreement, we have a peaceful route to do that. And I'm really optimistic that will be a major part of our agenda over the next 10 to 15 years. Probably
this government will run its course. There's no doubt about it, you know, which is about 2 years to go in this present government here in this republic. And Sinn Féin itself, I was looking at all the constituencies, the political nerd that I am. You have 32 seats. What about yourself? Have you ambitions for the Dáil?
Look, it's something I wouldn't rule out, but ultimately, you know, this is something that will be decided by the party, and it will be decided by local members here in Limerick. My main aim always when I joined Sinn Féin was to change the politics of our country. So whatever role the party designates for me is the role I'll fulfill. I've been very privileged to be in the Shannon for the last 6 years. I've very much enjoyed my work there. So look, I'm completely open. And as you say, and I tend to think you're right. I think this government probably does have another couple of years to run. I think they've decided to cling together rather than cling separately. So we've got a lot of water to cross before we get to any elections just now.
How come politicians, I mean, they have been around a long time, continuously put their foot in? I'm thinking of the recent professorship for Trinity College. I mean, how in the name of God did people think that they were going to get away with that, you know, and not do the decent thing about it, you know? I don't know. It's forever. You think they'd learn from the Zaphone case, you understand, and repeat the same process again. It's mind-boggling, Paul, when you stand back and look at it.
Well, it is. And I mean, if you were to think about the things that characterize this government, you'd have to say that they're incredibly accident-prone. They continuously make basic errors in terms of how to even go about the basic duties of running a government, running it fairly and transparently and cleanly. And unfortunately, this is the latest episode where it just doesn't look good. And again, I've been struck by the fact that even people within their own parties, within Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil, are saying, Jesus, this just doesn't look right. And of course, it isn't right. It's been handled extremely badly. But of course, the one thing that I think frustrates the public is, where's the accountability? When are politicians ever held
accountable.
We don't seem to do resignations in this country very often, do we?
No, absolutely not. We seem to put people aside and create a new job for them. I'm an ex-civil servant myself, so I know basically how the thing works, which needs a whole shake-up. But my special guest this morning on LiR Confidential is Senator Paul Gavan, and you can look him up on theoireachtas.ie. That's Paul Gavan. Paul, there's a vacancy, as you know, in my own county, Clare, just to be parochial about it, for a candidate. I mean, you wouldn't have far to travel.
I don't think my colleagues in Clare would be too impressed now, in fairness. Look, we've got a tremendous...
No, obviously, I'm not with a rider, of course. I'm not dismissing any of the colleagues in County Clare, but I'm just saying, like, it's not far away, you know.
No, it's not. And where I live is literally a mile from O'Brien's Bridge or thereabouts, or just over a mile. But I would say this: we've got some terrific activists in County Clare, including an outstanding councillor in Donna McGettigan. But I'm sure the good people of Clare in the Sinn Féin party will make a wise decision in due course.
Yeah, well said, you know, well retrieved. Well said, But you sponsored the bill recently, and as we were saying before we started the program, it's the Safe Access to Termination Bill. Now, obviously, this passed through the Senate, so now the next stage is the big fence in Dáil. But how did that process go, Paul, from your point of view in the Senate?
So it went very well. That's what I would say. I believe the way to use the Seanad is to find where you can collaborate on a cross-party basis. And I've done it on a couple of bills, and I've been very fortunate to have a couple of bills come out of the Seanad completely. In the last term, I got a bill to protect employees' tips through the Seanad. Unfortunately, the Fine Gael government then opposed it, but it's still a live bill. And as a result of that bill, we now have a government bill that's going to do effectively the same thing coming through. So I was very proud to play a part in that. This latest bill, the Safe Access Bill, is really about ensuring that when women are going about their private business, attending hospitals, that they're allowed to do so in privacy and with dignity. It's unfortunate that we've had a number of protests outside maternity hospitals in recent times. And look, we don't need to rerun the repeal referendum. That was a very challenging time, but the people of Ireland made a very clear decision in terms of repeal. So what my bill is about is just ensuring that women can access their services, including abortion services, without having to run the gauntlet of protests. The right to protest is sacred, by the way. I fully support that right. And indeed, I spent most of my life protesting. My bill simply says you can't do it within 100 meters of a maternity hospital. I think that's a very reasonable point to make.
And how would anybody know that a woman is going in for an abortion?
Which this is exactly right. They don't know. And I mean, you know, there are people coming out of that maternity hospital who've suffered miscarriages. There are people coming out of that hospital who have perhaps been told that they've got cancer or they're not able to conceive.
Absolutely, yeah.
Look, and I know from personal experience, it can be a very, very challenging time. I'm very lucky that I've got three children. Well, we have three children ourselves. And it's not a place, as far as I'm concerned, where it's appropriate to protest and look people in the eyes and chant at them or take pictures and so on and so forth. And as I say, we've really dealt with the repeal issue. It's been done, and I hope that all of us can unite in terms of just accepting that protests outside of maternity hospitals aren't appropriate. And I have to say, in fairness to colleagues from across political parties, they agreed with me. And I also want to give credit to a group from Limerick called Together to Safety. They're the ones who drew up this really excellent bill, and it was so well crafted that it has won the support of people across all political parties, and that's been key in getting that bill through the Seanad.
So now, as we say, the next hurdle for that is for that bill is to get it through the Dáil. So anyway, we'll watch and wait. I presume it's on the order of business for the next term, is it?
It will be. It's basically, we've got it halfway through the system. And I am optimistic because opinion polls have shown 85% level of support amongst the public to get a bill like this. In fact, my colleagues in the north of Ireland, along with the Green Party, have already passed a bill to do just this. So this is a question of us catching up with what's already been established in the 6 counties. I know my party, Sinn Féin, will be fully committed to driving the bill through, but we'll do so again in a collaborative way where we reach out across party lines to see this bill through. So I am optimistic. It would be an awful pity if the government decided to oppose it at this late stage, particularly as the government have actually committed in their own programme for government to deliver a bill to do justice. It just so happens that they haven't managed to come up with a bill, whereas thanks to Together for Safety, a Limerick-based organisation, we have.
Well, just a cursory glance at the bill myself, I don't see anything major troubling in it anyway, you know, but you never know what people might, what's the word I'm looking for, might conjure up in the meantime. Now, Paul,
that's true.
There's another bill that you're not sponsoring, but involved in, which is stalled, I think, at the moment. Is called the Occupied Territories Bill. That's been going on for a long time now, that bill, I'm saying. Where is that now? Where is that sitting? I mean, for someone who's not inside in the chamber, you know?
Well, I'm really pleased that you've raised the Occupied Territories Bill. That's the first thing to say. It's a crucial bill, which will mean that the parts of well, all of Palestine is occupied, as you know, by Israel, but where they've set down settlers and where they're growing their own, making their own products, that the Occupied Territories Bill would make it illegal to import those products, not just in terms of Israel, but other countries around the world. It passed all stages of the Senate. Francis Black has been championing the bill. It is still a live bill. It's in the Dáil now.
Does it include other occupied territories as well as some people describe it as an anti-Israel bill. What I'm trying to say is, would it apply to goods coming from other occupied parts of a country that might be occupied by another part?
Yes, it does. Yes, it does. It doesn't specify Israel.
I mean, as you know, the 6 counties are occupied by Britain, by another country. So would the goods from the 6 counties be covered in that bill?
No, not at all. Not at all. No.
Why not?
Well,
why not?
For one thing, because we had the Good Friday.
If the principle of the bill is the 6 counties of this republic are occupied by the British government, they have no business in Ireland, so surely the bill would cover that as well.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't, for the very good reason that we've had the Good Friday Agreement and we've had referendums north and south, and we have a peaceful route to unite our country. And I just want to deal with that other issue you mentioned, because you did say that some people say the bill is anti-Israeli, and just to be clear, it's absolutely not. It's simply establishing what I think a lot of us recognise has to happen, which is there has to be an awful lot more pressure put on the Israeli government because of the way that they have occupied Palestine. I've been to Palestine. I've seen firsthand in the West Bank.
I've been to Israel myself.
Yeah. I mean, I've seen firsthand what happens on a daily basis there. While I haven't been to Gaza, colleagues of mine have, and I mean, they describe it as the biggest open prison in the world. And the truth of the matter is, if we really care about international affairs, and Sinn Féin is very proud of its international records, then we have to tackle issues like apartheid in occupied Palestine. And it was only 2 weeks ago that Amnesty International produced a report, a very detailed report, and they joined 450 other human rights organizations across the world as recognizing that, unfortunately, Israel is currently in apartheid state.
I wouldn't put much credence now with Amnesty International. That's my own personal opinion. But nevertheless, you have to divorce regimes like government of Israel from what we call the ordinary people who go about their business in that country, you know, in Israel as well.
I agree. I agree. And let me deal with that point.
Because people get confused. As you said, people get, just like this country, people might confuse the shambles of a government with the generality of citizens of the Republic are trying to scratch out a living and get on with their daily lives. That's what I'm trying to say. And of course, an awful lot of Palestinians come across into Israel on a daily basis to work and go home again.
They do. And I mean, whenever I raise the issue of apartheid in Israel, I always make the point that there are fantastic Jewish human rights organizations like B'Tselem who have stood up and spoken out. And it's always important to recognize there are fantastic Jewish members of the population who stand up for the rights of Palestinians, and I always make a point of making of establishing that fact. But just to be clear, by the way, I would have respect for Amnesty International, but you can add to that Human Rights Watch, you can add to that the UN rapporteur on the Palestine situation, Michael Link, and I attended a meeting with him just 2 weeks ago. All of these people are absolutely clear that unfortunately Israel is an apartheid state, and just as we had to deal with that in South Africa in the 1980s, and the world came together to challenge that, we have to do the same here in terms of Israel.
That's true. Of course, Palestine has to get its own house in order as a country as well. It has no elections for the last, I don't know how long. It has no civil service, no police. What you'd expect with a modern state, with an actual country, it doesn't have those elements in it. So as Palestine as a country leaves a lot to be desired as well. Of course, I don't know what the situation in Palestine is, although some can guess it, for the rights of LGBTQ people in Palestine as well. There's fault in that as well. Of course, as we know, in the Knesset, there's a lot of Palestinians and Marsh Arabs and gay people of all hues and colours represented in that. I don't know what the representation is in the government in Palestine.
I can only imagine how hard it must be to organise any kind of government when your country is occupied, when people are being murdered on a daily basis.
But Paul, let's be fair. There's two terrorist organisations running Palestine, as you know. You know the history of it.
I know the history of it.
Yeah, Hamas and Fatah. They're not the bastions of democracy, are they?
Here's the point I would make in relation to that.
Right.
You have to leave it to the Palestinian people themselves to organise who represents them.
People would say then that Palestinian people are happy with two terrorist organisations in their country. But we know that's not the case, and that's not true, because I've spoken to many Palestinians living in Ireland, and that's not the case. But why is it? Why are they living in handouts from the United Nations as a country?
But you know why? They've had their economy completely ravaged. They've had their communities bombed back to the Stone Age by the Israeli government.
Yeah, if your economy is based on terrorism, it's not much of an economy.
Just to be clear, I don't agree with that. I don't agree with the assertion you're making. I really don't. And again, as I say, I've been there. I've spoken to many fine Palestinian activists and indeed ordinary family members just trying to survive under that apartheid regime. That's not something that I could even ever understand how hard that must be. But
when were the last elections held in Palestine that the people could have a say in?
How can you organise elections when your country's been?
They had regular elections. They had regular elections, as you know, in Palestine.
Yes, but how can you organise elections when your country is under occupation and constantly under bombardment and having people murdered and killed on a daily basis? Seriously.
Well, some people would not agree with that premise, as you know yourself. But I mean, herein lies the problem. Herein lies the problem. I suppose eventually, sometime, both countries will have to, whether they like it or not. And as you know, as the older generation move off, as we know in our own country, as move off through natural death and all that, as the older people die off, the regimes will change. And I believe that the younger generation on both sides, because I've met both of them, will have no truck with this situation. And hopefully there's a brighter future of harmony and cooperation between both countries, because they both deserve better.
Well, of course they do. I mean, the current situation is entirely untenable. Let's be clear about that.
I mean, there's no doubt about that. I mean, obviously.
But we have to be honest. We have to be honest about it. And I want to raise this point because when you have over 450 NGO organizations across the world recognizing that Israel is an apartheid state, it's not helpful for our government to say, oh, yeah, but please don't use that word. If we're going to be honest about the situation, then let's be honest. Let's recognize it. Let's recognize it as what it is, an apartheid state, and then let's challenge it on a human rights basis.
So some people would say that. I myself personally wouldn't agree with that premise, even though it is tough. But I'm saying that at least in Israel, they have a chance every 3 or 4 years, or sometimes more frequent, to throw out a government and change their government. and make a little bit of progress, if you could call it that. But however, I think that time really, and there's always events, as you know yourself, Paul, when there seems to be some movement, positive movement between Israel and Palestine, there's always some other event gets in the way, like a change of regime in America, like a change of president, like a war we have now in Europe, which is, well, potential for horrific things that we don't even want to think about. And hopefully there'll be diplomacy there as well, Now, an awful lot of people have called for the Russian ambassador to be expelled from Ireland. What is Sinn Féin's view of that?
Yeah, we've made that call. In fact, I think we're amongst the first political parties to make that call. Mary Lou's been very clear on that he should be expelled. Yeah,
you're right. But I think there's another side of it as well. As we know, diplomacy works behind the scenes most of the time. 90% of the work of diplomats are hidden, and then the result will come. So would it be wise to shut down that channel that we could possibly take advantage of, or have at least communication,
You see, I believe in diplomacy. That's the first thing to say. And in most cases, diplomacy is the way to go. But unfortunately, when you see the scale of the human rights abuses, when you see what looks very clearly to be war crimes, ultimately, sometimes you have to send the strongest possible message. I just think we're in that situation at the minute. You get no argument for me in that case with the limited information we're getting, because in a war zone you can't be expected to walk in with your camera all over the place, So I mean, there's a deficit there as well. There's no doubt about that. But it's horrific. If half the stories are true, it's a tragedy. There's no doubt, a human tragedy. But doesn't it go to show, Paul, on a world level, that the ineffectiveness of NATO and absolute ineffectiveness of the UN? Well, it certainly shows that the UN has not been effective. And again, I think there's more that our country could do. We fought so hard to get that seat on the UN Council, and yet we've been silent in terms of other horrific conflicts like the one in Yemen, for example, or indeed the issue of Palestine that we spoke about just a minute or two ago. NATO is interesting that you raised that point, because let me be frank with you. NATO is not going to be the solution here. 1 million people were killed in Iraq over that horrendous illegal war. 50,000 Afghan citizens were murdered with NATO forces. And as for Libya, we just don't know how many hundreds of thousands of deaths there were, but we do know that slavery is now back in Libya. So let's be clear. The answer to war is not more war. And the answer to try and establish justice in the world, well, it's not going to come through NATO. Even just look at their record for the last 20 years. These are not the people who are going to bring peace to our world. Unfortunately, we're at a stage where war is almost a business. There's an industrial military complex at heart across many parts of the world. And to be frank, that's part of the problem.
And I think that as a country, as a small country ourselves, of course, we're part of the EU. Everyone knows that. We don't have to emphasize that. But I think we have to be careful as a small country. We have to be careful not to be totally gung-ho to support one side or another, despite the fact that it's a big one against a small one. Nevertheless, we do have to be very careful as a country. I mean, we're not neutral. Let's face it, Paul. We're not neutral.
Well, we're militarily neutral, but no one would ever say that we're neutral in the face of injustice. And just as I've spoken out about Palestine in Yemen, I have make no apologies for speaking out against the Russian invasion of Ukraine, because it's the right thing to do. But I think the point that most Irish people recognise is the best role we can play is one of trying to act as a voice for peace in the world, and knowing the fact that we don't have a record of conquest, of colonialism, gives us a particular credibility in that regard. If we were to join a military alliance, to be frank, because of the size of our country, we would make virtually no difference. Whereas on a peacekeeping role, we have a tremendously respected reputation because our forces have gone out to all parts of the world to try and establish peace under the Blue Helmets programs. That's where we can play a positive role. And the one thing you can be sure of with Sinn Féin is that we will not align ourselves with NATO. We'll align ourselves with peace and justice throughout the world.
You're right, Paul. And I think that before we finish up, I think that the fact that NATO have is aggravating the situation at this stage from my limited knowledge of it, rather than having a positive effect. And I think the United Nations step in and take more of a prominent role in this, because Putin, it doesn't matter what you think of him, I cannot say on this program what I think of the man, but I'm saying that he's worried about his borders. He's worried about NATO and nuclear weapons as a threat to his country, as he would see it, I'm saying, as he would see it. Now, whether it's true or not, it's irrelevant. That's how he would see it, one thing. And another thing is, the EU want to be very careful. I mean, van der Leyen doesn't speak for me as a citizen of this republic. Van der Leyen is not elected by me or you or anybody else. And I think that appalling carry-on for going around with a bulletproof vest all around Ukraine, that sends all the wrong signals for the EU. So they shouldn't be in there at all like that, in my opinion.
Well, I agree with you. I think we need to have a real focus on measures to try and end the war.
Yeah.
And the danger I think all of us are worried about is the danger of further escalation of the war. And there's an awful lot of posturing at the moment. And I would agree with you in terms of that point you just made in terms of von der Leyen, in terms of that. What we need are active measures to try and establish a route to end this war. At the same time, we clearly can have no truck with Putin in particular. And we need to make that clear. But ultimately, we're going to have to arrange how all of us in Europe can live together peacefully. The problem is, the more armaments that we produce, the more there's an attempt to prolong the conflict. That's not a solution either. We need to see a just solution that gives Ukraine back its borders. Ironically, the solution was mapped out via the Minsk agreements back in 2014. And it's an international failure to actually respect those agreements and implement them that has been a major factor in leading to this conflict, none of which justifies anything that Putin has done.
No, and indeed, of course, as we know, Nikita Khrushchev was Ukrainian, the leader of the old USSR one time. And of course, there's the old historical, well, we want the motherland back. I'm not saying that is the case. We can only guess. That's all we can do, But getting back to our domestic, isn't it amazing, Paul? And that the housing minister can have an emergency meeting to get houses for Ukrainians, and they do deserve them. We do take them. But they had no emergency meeting for our own last 2 or 3 years to improve the housing situation.
Isn't it remarkable? Because, and I heard him being challenged on this on the radio just the other week, where on the one hand he said, well, we've been doing everything possible to try and fix the housing crisis. He has come up with additional measures, and I welcome them in terms of trying to help our Ukrainian brothers and sisters. But why weren't those measures being brought into action 2 years ago? And I mean, I think, there's a real feeling out there amongst the people of our country. I come across it every day. I come across it in Limerick City every day, where people just know this government aren't delivering on housing. They're not delivering. And in fact, if you look at the figures, the homeless figures so far this year, they've actually got worse. They've gone up by 20%. So things, beyond all the spin and rhetoric, and my God, we're getting that every day from the government. The reality on the ground is things are getting worse. And that's the one thing that worries me. If we are going to have to put up with this government for another couple of years, what are we going to be left with at that time when hopefully we'll get an election and hopefully get a change of government?
Yeah, well, I can tell you, Paul, before we finish up, that the queues for food and the queues for getting food and stuff like that in the local food banks and around are getting longer and longer and longer. And I'm sure it's replicated throughout the country. For a good friend of mine, Councillor Ken Smullen, he's elected now in Tullamore Council. He runs a food bank, as it has for years before he ever got elected. And the poverty that people are in now is shocking to me. I mean, I'm a pensioner myself, so I know myself what balancing the book, so to speak, whatever book it is. I don't have any book. I just balance. That's it. But Paul, just looking down the road a bit, Sinn Féin has 32 seats now, and I was just looking to cost at the 40 constituencies. Obviously, they won't get up to 82 seats. I mean, really, the most optimistic member of the party would never agree with that. But I think there's a possibility they could get up to around the late 50s, early 60s. So they will need a partner, a dancing partner, so to speak, to form a government with. And obviously they're getting thinner on the ground because, as you know, the Labour Party is I don't think will rise up high anyway, you know.
Well, who knows? I'm loath to make predictions because, you know, it was only 2019 that we had a really tough local election result. We bounced back fantastically the following year. So let's not take anything for granted. I mean, I just hope that we can continue working away on the ground. And you mentioned that at the beginning of the interview, the way that Sinn Féin are a real activist party that work hard on the ground. All we can do is continue to work hard, build our party, build our support. We've always said that after the election that we will talk to any other party. We don't rule people in or out in terms of trying to form an alternative government. But ultimately, the people have to have their say first.
Absolutely, and I think democracy has to win out in the end, anyway, as you say, and because it's fragile, it can be very fragile. But Paul, I want to really, really thank you for your time. I know you're busy. You're probably dying for a cup of coffee.
Well, look, I really appreciate you giving me the opportunity this morning. It's been a really good engagement and quite a challenging engagement too. And I think that's always for the better. So I very much appreciate it and I've enjoyed the conversation. Thank you.
And and we wish you all the very best in the future, Paul, with the further bill. And we wish that bill that's going to the Dáil a safe and swift passage through it. So until we meet again, Senator Paul Gavan of Sinn Féin, take care and bye-bye.
Thanks a million. All the best. Slán.
Thank you.